I've seen a lot of bad stuff in my 50 years in intelligence, but I don't recall anything that gave me viscerally, in the pit of my stomach, a more uncomfortable, uneasy feeling than when I realized what the Russians were doing. It was pretty sophisticated, and they did focus on certain voter blocks. And of course, 70,000 or 80,000 votes in 3 states would have swung the election. And apparently, the Russians have gone to school on our system, understand it. They understood the political dynamics, political landscape here, and they certainly understood how to use tools to exploit it.
But also we knew from experience that the Russians had many different methods of influencing elections in Europe. Getting politicians to accept money, trying to push money into political parties, maybe camouflaging the source, and extorting and even blackmailing individuals to work with them. We've seen that across the board, and there's a lot of publicly available information and stories about that.
I do know that collusion is clearly a tool in the kit bag that the Russians will use.
Right.
So any way they can co-opt somebody,
Right.
recruit them, influence them, even on where the party that they're recruiting is unwitting, they'll do it.
When the buildings were hit, or when the bombs hit Pearl Harbor, we all came together as a country. We knew we had been attacked in some level. Now, I understand this is a much more insidious type of attack that you don't feel right away, but it is an attack at the fabric of democracy. There's no question about it. Why isn't it that we didn't respond?
Things in the physical domain that you can see, feel, and touch, destroyed buildings, people killed, wounded, that has a much more apparent, immediate and indelible impact on people than something in the cyber domain, which is a bit more ethereal, and it's hard to, doesn't have physical attributes, so it's harder to get your arms around.
It really comes down, I think, to leadership. As long as the occupant of the Oval Office continues to refute the unanimous assessment of CIA, FBI, and NSA about what they did, and continues to ignore, I think, the real challenges to our system of government by what the Russians and others can do, it undercuts any effort to try to deal with this issue comprehensively, strategically, and thoughtfully. And until that leadership that comes out of the White House is really going to say, this is critically important for our future as a country and as a democracy, it's going to be a really tough road.
And we briefed, John and I, and
You guys were there
briefed
when this happened.
The President-elect at the time on January 6th. So we did present, we had very, very high confidence level in it. And I believe his first reaction to it was that this caused a question about the legitimacy of his election, which wasn't the intent at all. And yeah, I get it, that's important. But the bigger issue here, and what is bothersome to me, is the singular indifference to the threat posed by Russia.
Серце розривається, дивлячись, як жив наш президент.
It's a museum of corruption.
What does that mean?
It means that the whole wealth of Ukraine was
You stolen money.
Yeah,
It's
almost all here.
It's evidence of Ukrainian corruption, as it was in the time of our President Yanukovych, who fled from Ukraine to Russia in 2014.
European Union leaders and Ukraine have failed to sign an historic free trade deal after a last-minute U-turn from Kiev.
So Mr. Yanukovych was one of the main corrupt presidents in the world.
Сказали, вроде бы как бы работали в этом направлении.
Мы тут, чтобы до вас еще Украина, стисла Европа.
One of the biggest corrupt presidents in the world, and he played, I believe, very dangerous role.
Хотели на корне сразу это все поломать, задавить, сразу, чтобы даже никому повадно не было. Но реакция оказалась обратной.
For the whole world, because he invited Russian troops to Ukrainian territory to take Ukraine on this battlefield. And unfortunately, we still have this conflict on the east of our territory, which is a big threat of our independence and for our democracy.
Майдан – це голос народу. голос народу – це голос Божий.
Mr. Manafort, he was political spin doctor and mentor for Mr. Yanukovych. They spent together 10 years. Mr. Manafort won together with Mr. Yanukovych 4 election campaigns. He was very successful with Yanukovych and he was very well paid by Yanukovych. But Yanukovych had no personal money. Usually it was money stolen from Ukrainian citizens, from Ukrainian budget. And this payment were done from hidden account of Ukrainian crooks to accounts of Mr. Manafort. I understood that success of Yanukovych as a crooked president was based on the skills, knowledges, and tricks prepared, organized by Mr. Manafort. Black Ledger is unofficial records. They were stored in party office of Mr. Yanukovych in downtown of Kiev. And this document, it was just written by hand by some people. And Paul Manafort was mentioned in these records, and it pushed the whole interest of American law enforcement institution forward. And on this specific page, you can even see this, the specific amount of money, $750,000, which were paid to Mr. Manafort. That is why I was not really happy with Mr. Manafort. And when his role in Black Ledger was disclosed, I was the voice arguing and asking for investigation, what happened. It was, again, August 2016. And Mr. Manafort resigned from the position of Mr. Trump election campaign.
In the last several weeks, there had been story after story about Paul Manafort's ties to pro-Russian Ukraine officials and regimes.
It's story based on real fact, not on misinformation or fake news. Ukraine has a lot of changes to present the world now. We have new president elect on free and fair elections in April this year. We have new parliament elected in July this year. We have new prosecutor general appointed in August. We have big reshuffle of political leaders in Ukraine.
Усім країнам пострадянського Союзу. Подивіться на нас. Усе можливо.
You have written on him more than anybody in this town, more than any reporter that I know, and you've been doing it for a long time because you've seen him as sort of the face of the dark side of K Street, I guess.
Yeah, the rotten core of Washington. He is a bottom feeder, but he's also somebody who has been a pioneer in inventing this world that we live in.
And when you say that, meaning the world of the rich political consultant, the international political consultant, is it that?
He's reinvented Washington several times over. He created the first firm in the 1980s, along with Roger Stone and Charlie Black, that both had political consulting and lobbying.
Now it happens all the time.
Yeah. And so it was an incredible scheme that they created, where you get people elected to office, and then you turn around and you lobby them on behalf of your corporate clients. So that was invention number one. Invention number two was that they rapidly expanded this idea that they could become all-purpose firms on behalf of foreign clients. So they were doing both their lobbying at home in D.C., and then they'd go back to their countries and they would help them win elections or Potemkin elections in order to legitimize their power.
Is it relatively similar in different countries or in DC to pay for a political campaigner like $10 million for what that amounts are usually paid?
No, and I think that's part of the reason why Manafort was so attracted to Ukraine. When he worked in Ukraine, he dropped all of his other clients because he was making so much money in Ukraine, and there was no other place in the world that he could get the type of fees that he received in Ukraine.
He'd lost his primary client, this president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, because he was swept out in a revolution, and so Manafort didn't have. He tumbled very far, very fast professionally. He lost his status. His ego had taken a hit. Financially, he'd taken a hit, so much so that his cash became tight. He had to take out all sorts of absurd loans from banks where he was actually lying to the banks in order to get more money from them. He had a very expensive lifestyle, which became very difficult to finance. His own daughter's wedding was something that he struggled to pay for after being a multi-millionaire. And then his personal life collapsed because he'd been having an affair and he got caught in the affair. He continued with the affair and then got caught again. And so his marriage was in a state of distress. His kids hated him. And he was essentially forced to check himself into a clinic in Arizona to recover from his breakdown. And so he was desperate when he came to the Trump campaign, and he took risks that he wouldn't have taken under normal circumstances.